Greetings, class. This is Professor Elena Koch, and the purpose of this video is to give you a brief orientation to the class and what you can expect this summer. Um, this, as you know from reading the course description, is a course in American literature after the Civil War, which means that we'll start in about 1865 or so. This is a survey course, which means that we cover a broad amount of material in a relatively short time. And it's meant to give you a broad overview of a lot of literature. So we'll be studying three major periods this summer. For the first couple of weeks, we'll be looking at realism, the period immediately following the Civil War until the turn of the century. And then we'll look at modernism, the period in the first half of the 20th century, and we'll end with the contemporary period, which begins around 1945 and takes us through the present day. We'll be reading quite a lot of material. We'll be reading two novels, The Great Gatsby, which many of you read in high school, and you'll be reading again this summer. It's always better the second time around. As well as a novel that's less than a year old, a novel called The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, which recently won both the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize. We'll be reading a whole range of short stories from across the three major periods, as well as a whole range of poetry. And we're going to be covering works by approximately 40 authors. So as you can see, that's a lot of material to get through. So here's what you can expect. Like a regular college class, you should expect to spend about 3 hours a week preparing for every 1 hour of class time. When you compress that into an 8-week summer course and the work is online, that amounts to about 18 hours a week minimum. It might take you more if you read slowly or if you're shooting for an A in the course. So that's what you should plan for. Generally, our weeks are going to be broken into a couple of parts. At the beginning of the week, you'll be focusing on reading the assigned fiction and poetry, which will be listed in the course schedule. You'll be watching a couple of short videos most weeks that I will post for you in D2L. And in the second half of the week, after you've done all that reading, you'll be posting in discussions. You'll be writing a short response paper, about a page or two, and you'll be reading the posts that your classmates and I make in discussions. Each week there will also be a short reading quiz. Okay, so in terms of your responsibilities, make sure that you're prepared this summer for the technological demands of an online course. Make sure that you have access to a good computer with a good internet connection. Make sure that you have backup plans in case your computer goes down or you lose power at home. Make sure you know where your public libraries are or the computer labs on campus. Okay. Read the syllabus carefully so that you know what to expect. Obviously, you need to do the assignments and follow the discussions. I'll also expect that you regularly check D2L for any announcements, any changes to the schedule, any additions, things like that. And it's especially important that you be in touch with me when you have any questions. I'll be checking my email multiple times every day so that if you have any questions, I can get back to you in a timely manner. This is me. I'm your professor. Again, my name is Elena Koch. My title is doctor or professor, or you could just call me Elena. I've been teaching at Prairie State for 17 years now, and this really is my dream job. I get to work closely with students, and I get to teach material that I really love. So I'm excited to be working with you this summer. I live in the area. I've got a couple kids. I'm married to a music professor at another community college, and we have a dog and a cat. So things are busy around here, as I'm sure they're probably busy for you too this summer. Okay, so now let's shift to actual course content. I want to talk to you about the literary canon. The canon. This is a concept I want you to be familiar with throughout our summer together. So before I tell you what the canon is, I want you to imagine that you are at a party of educated English professors, maybe from elite universities, a number of authors, literary editors, publishers, all kinds of bookish types. And I want you to think for a minute about what great American authors you assume they have all read. What would a group of people like this be expected to know in terms of American literature? which great authors and which great works do you think that they're familiar with? See if you can compose a little list in your head of what those great works and who those great authors might be. Okay, so this brings us to the canon. We'll come back to your mental list in a minute here. The canon is a body of literary works, novels, poems, plays, short stories, as well as their authors, who are widely considered to be excellent. There's wide agreement that these works and their authors are excellent, that they've made an excellent contribution to the literary tradition. Of course, there's no literal list that exists anywhere. This is sort of an amorphous idea. The canon matters. The concept of the canon matters because it helps to determine whose work we read. If you're an English major, for example, it helps to determine whether you are required to take a course in Shakespeare or whether you're required to take a course in British literature or two. It helps to determine whose works are important enough that we should be familiar with them. It also helps to determine what will last, who the next generation or two will be reading. So this is a fairly important idea. Now, go back to our thought experiment. What names did you come up with? When I do this exercise in a face-to-face class, the names that usually come up are some of these guys: Benjamin Franklin, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, Walt Whitman, the great poet, Mark Twain, the author of Huckleberry Finn, Ernest Hemingway. And what you'll notice is who's missing from that list are women and people of color. That list that I made is a great list. These works of the white guys, the dead white guys, mainly from New England, their works are wonderful. And we're going to be reading some of them this semester, the ones who fall into the American Literature 2 timeline. But they don't tell the whole story. They don't tell the whole story. And this leads to what in the 80s became known as the canon wars. Scholars started to realize that when we form a literary canon based primarily on the works of only the dead white guys, we're missing out on some things. Okay, so the assumptions here that we're making as we go forward in this discussion about the canon is that, well, the first one is that the ability to write and publish literature depends on access to money and power. If, for example, you're an African American in this country and it's the early 1800s and you're in the South, you are most likely a slave. And if you're a slave, it's probably illegal where you live to learn to read and to write. That makes it pretty hard to publish the great American novel. But let's say you're like Frederick Douglass and you manage to write your manuscript. How are you going to get it published? How are you going to get it to be taken seriously by the literary world? You need access to the publishing system at the time. And that wasn't available to everybody. Another assumption here as we look at what the canon means is that there is more than one way to be excellent. You probably know what it's like when somebody doesn't like your favorite movie or a TV show or a musical artist and you can't understand why anybody doesn't see its excellence. Or when somebody likes something that you think is garbage. Tastes change. You probably also see, just by looking at old pictures of your grandparents, that fashion changes, right? So our ideas about what is excellent can change over time. This is true of literature as well. So all of these things affect what goes into the canon, what gets taught. And during the canon wars, scholars started to look at how we can include more authors to tell our story. Our last assumption here is that literary study is best when it's inclusive, when it includes the dead white guys, but also when it includes other voices who've contributed to our literary traditions and our cultural traditions in this country. What does that have to do with us this summer? Our reading list is a mix of authors. You're going to see that we're reading some of the classics. We're starting with a couple excerpts of Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, which is sort of the masterwork of American literature. We don't have time to read the whole thing in 8 weeks, so we'll read just a couple of little excerpts. We'll also be reading works like the short story by Mary Wilkins Freeman that we'll read the first week that got lost for a while and then rediscovered. Works that were widely considered to be excellent. And then whoever was in charge kind of forgot about those authors, and they've been rediscovered more recently, and their literary excellence has been celebrated again. And we'll be ending, since this class goes through the present day, with newer works that maybe aren't canonical yet. They aren't part of the canon yet, but might be years from now. Okay, so this is the end of this particular video. Next up, I want you to watch the video called Realism and Regionalism. I'd also like you to take a look at the reading guide and assign text for this week. See the schedule for deadlines. I'll be making a separate video about the syllabus and schedule. And if you have any questions at all, please do email me. I'm looking forward to this summer, all the discussions that we're going to have about some really great literature. And I hope that you're looking forward to reading these works too.